How's it going? After break, everybody make it back. Let's just jump in. Raise your hand if you don't want to do sales. Be honest. Bullshit-free zone. Okay, we've got a few. I think there's probably a few more of the reluctancy, and I think it's okay if you admit it. But most people don't like to do sales because of either one or two things, and both of them are this guy, right? Like that's what you think when you think I don't want to do sales. You don't want to be him, right? But it might also be working on a commission, right? That's super intimidating for a lot of people who haven't done it before. And most people don't want to do that unless they get tricked into it. And I'll tell you the story about how I got tricked into it in a little bit. Or they feel like there's some sort of lack of integrity that comes from doing sales, right? Mitch was talking about discounts, and discount contracts typically are one of those things where, you know, people think, wow, why would the sales guy is like, oh, will you buy this if I give you 10% off? That's typically what people are thinking about when they say, I don't want to do sales. And I've got a confession. That's definitely the way I was thinking about it too, right? In 2008, I left a great nonprofit job. I left a great nonprofit job, and I was raising a bunch of money for Boys and Girls Club of Chicago, having a great job doing that, but I felt like there just wasn't enough tech in the work that I was doing. So I came out to the Bay Area because 2008 was, if you remember, great time to look for a job. So as a sucker, came out here and then started to reinvent my career at the same time, look to figure out kind of what is the best ways to work in tech. And I would go to everybody I knew and say, I'd really like to work in tech as long as I don't have to do sales, right? And so I got, accustomed to repeating that over and over and over again. And then, but by the time I got settled and the economy started to recover, what I saw is that tech sales isn't anything like that guy. Right, tech sales has evolved to be smart, young, energetic teams, people who are scrappy, problem solvers, coming right out of school and thinking, how do I go fix something? How do I build something? How do I go after something? Right, and that's when I arrived essentially as part of a new hire class tied for Employee 16 at AdRoll, where I showed up on day one ready to be an account executive and try this sales thing. Team I got onto, nothing like him, right? Everyone was team first, individual second. We were pretty small startup, but ready to take on the world. And then in the spring of 2010, Google released the exact same product that we were selling. And so I thought, wow, this is really fun. I did the startup thing. I got to do tech, and I thought for sure I would only have a few months till I discovered what it was like to be on the other end of the Google Steamroller. Which I gotta tell you, last night when I found this image, I was really excited that somebody else out there put it together, meaning that they experienced the same thing or at least have felt the same way. I know many of you guys have seen or heard different variations of this same story, but what I found was that instead of absolutely getting steamrolled, what happened was, since we focused on finding the exact right customer, we were able to stay alive through that period. And basically, by finding that target market, which is exactly what we're going to talk about today, finding your targets, then doing outreach to them, we were able to essentially stay alive through that transition period and discover the number one value of having a sales team, which, if you haven't thought about it much, that number one value is really providing your clients value, right, from that interaction with a salesperson, right? And so Mitch basically gave you a higher picture of like, hey, here's how you identify your customers after you have your first 10 deals done or so. Look for the attributes, figure out what's in those contracts, and then go get more of them, right? And then, and Gabe even overlaid some of that of how you identify those folks, really important to identify and then take immediate action. So my message today is going to be several parts, but it doesn't quite matter exactly how you do it, but you've got to take action basically and do it and start doing these things right away, even when you're small. So while I was at AdRoll, I've had the chance to pitch big companies like Amazon, Microsoft, as well as the #1 place to find your Renaissance gear, Renaissance Superstore, which, by the way, there's only 11 days left till Scarborough Fair, if anybody's tracking these things. But our ideal customer was a lot more like the latter, right? We eventually grew up market, and I had a chance to sell to bigger companies, but the core of the business was built in the SMB, and being able to identify that, although we didn't write down an ideal customer profile, we worked with each other to identify, hey, why did that guy buy and this guy didn't, right? I just got off of a good call, here's what happened. And that team basically gelled around the idea of, okay, how do we figure out who we're looking for and how do we do that together? And that's one of the things that I want you guys to start thinking about. Basically, how do we go find companies, right? There's a lot of different options, right? Gabe talked about several databases when he said, don't do this. But the first gen data providers were people like Hoover's and D&B. Did anybody use Jigsaw ever? Remember Jigsaw was a product back in the day, became data.com when it got to Salesforce. Basically great resources to go and get a big list, right? You typically would start with saying, okay, where do I find a list of basically every company that has X revenue or every company that's in X region, right? Like Mitch was saying, dominate your backyard. You go to a database like this and say, give me all California companies that have 25 to 100 employees, right? There's a lot of risk to that, though, because you've got a data set that you only know a little bit about, and we're going to talk about how to find more stuff from there, right? As the sales data game has evolved, there's other tools that have started to crop up, right? BuiltWith came out, Datanyze came out. BuiltWith and Datanyze are good examples of technology finders, right? They scrape the web and they come back and they say, okay, all of these companies have Marketo, or all of these companies are using Salesforce Web to Lead, right? And everybody here is hosted on Rackspace or whatever their host is. So depending on what you sell, that can help you target as a big list. But you still don't quite know enough to sell into that group, right? You still don't quite know enough about them, right? Another tool can be used, like Import.io is a tool that sometimes sales reps or sometimes teams would use to go scrape long lists of potential customers, right? You don't want to build a scraper, or you're like me, you don't have the technical skills to do that. You go and you throw a URL into Import.io, you get a whole list. But again, you're not quite getting enough, right? And so it could be really, really tempting this day and age where I came up in a time when there was only a handful of sales tools. There are too many tools to talk about now. So it's really tempting to be in the spot that you're in where you're just starting to do sales for your companies and think, okay, what can I go buy? Because why? Half this room said, well, not everybody admitted it, but there's a lot of people in the room who said they didn't want to do sales. It gets really easy to think, okay, well, if I bought one of these guys, would it help me not do sales, right? Is it about my presentation software? Is it about my lead gen software? The lead providers that Gabe mentioned earlier today, same thing, right? But it's actually not that easy, and it's a real pitfall, and it's why we're not doing a whole session today on sales tools. Because although sales tools are really cool, there's way too many of them out there, and it creates too big of a hole for you. So we got to get back to the basics. Essentially, starting with who are the individual targets, or who are the company targets for your business? Who are you trying to sell to, right? One thing you like to do sometimes is start with the competitors, right? So if you're going out and you're creating PR software, you might go to Cision's website and say, all right, I'm going to go after all the companies that use Cision, right? Not a bad strategy, very tempting. You start and say, okay, Kellogg's, I'm going to find who the decision maker is at Kellogg's. But if you've ever had the experience to hear a moose coming through the woods, it's the same as telling these big competitors, hey, I'm coming for you, because who are they best friends with? If you're the decision person selling into Kellogg's is going to tell you, oh yeah, this new startup just called me. Looks like they're just going after your customers, right? Got to get a little more creative than that. So let's start with my friend Doug, right? Doug is the VP of development at Lead Genius, right? Here's his LinkedIn profile. He does look like this in real life. When you get a chance to meet him sometime, he's just about that shiny, which I don't really have many stones to throw in my glass house. But what I want you to do is go use LinkedIn and look for keywords to find the enthusiasts for whoever be using your product, right? There is somebody who's really enthusiastic about that technology or the stack that you're built in, or the thing that you do, right? Whether it's creating an amazing customer service experience, whether it's managing a call center, whether it's managing a sales force, whether it's needing the insights, for data insights for the movie studio. Somebody out there is talking about those things. And if you look on LinkedIn, if you scroll all the way to the bottom of somebody's profile, you see that there's tags for skills. And these may not be tags that Doug went out and tagged himself in. Maybe somebody came along and said, oh yeah, I remember I worked on that Hadoop project with Doug. And so there's 2 or 3 people who tagged Doug as knowing something about Hadoop, right? And that tempting little button right there, if you click it, will reveal about 175,000 other profiles of people that are interested in Hadoop, right? These are enthusiasts who either cared about that technology or somebody else cared to tag them, right? So now what do we do, right? So you dig down and you find this user group, and you dig a little bit further in and you end up with a list like this, right? You've got this list, and you can see this one is ranked by who I know. So I've got shared connections with somebody at Apple and Twitter and Quibble. I don't know what that is, but it sounds cool. Sounds like they would want to buy whatever I'm selling if I was selling into that profile. I want to encourage you guys to start there. If you're doing validation with customers and you still don't know quite what you're selling, start with people that you know. You're one step removed to get introduced to somebody at Apple will tell you whether or not you're building the right thing. But if you're ready to say, yeah, here's my line in the sand, I'm going to start doing sales today, start with people you don't know. Go work your way off the bottom of the list, right? Start with the assumptions that Mitch talked about, right? There are some assumptions about your business that you know. The people who want this have certain things about them. They're on a big team. They're at a company that has over $100 million of revenue. There's an SVP who's dedicated to the subject of the thing that you're selling, whether it's the CIO who needs to buy the security software that you're building or whatever that is. However you're starting with that assumption, you're going to test that, and you're going to get feedback essentially right away. Does that make sense? Okay. Here was my initial stack as a rep at Admiral. Before all the tools and all the bells and whistles, and before a rep would interview with you and say, oh, but I need Yesware and Datanyze, and I need to make sure I get leads from SoWare, and and all the other stuff that we give on the list now. When we talk about our sales stack, which is one of the funniest terms of the last probably 18 months, it was really just this simple. Email checking to decide whether or not I guessed the email right. Built with for what technology is on the site. And if I wanted to do a big outreach push, and big push meaning finding 20 companies at a time, I would use something like an Import.io when that came out. And that came out several years after I had been selling. It doesn't have to be really complicated, and you don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to go buy all the software, because buying all that software doesn't get you out of having to do sales. Like, you signed up for it. I'm sorry. If I'm the one breaking it to you, I'm really sorry about that. But you have to do sales, right? So let's talk about how to connect these folks, right? Who's doing cold email outreach already? Right? Okay, so most of the people in the room are doing some kind of cold email outreach. How's that going? Okay, we got some thumbs up, we got some thumbs down, got a lot of downs. I don't mean to laugh, but that's what's supposed to happen, right? You try something, right? Anybody doing really big batches, emailing more than 50 people at once? Okay, well, let's talk about why that might not be going super hot, right? They tell me that software is eating the world, right? Software is definitely eating sales. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It looks a lot like this, right? We've got people running the machines and doing all this really cool sales software. And so now I've got the ability to email 500 people a day, right? Like, that's pretty cool, right? I don't have to worry about customizing messaging, because I've got a giant email spreadsheet. So I can do a big mail merge, basically, right? That all seems great. Analysts at Topo, who are the analysts that think a lot about the sales development space and doing the outreach, they tell me there's about 500 sales technologies out there, and essentially 1 or 2 being added every week, right? That looks like this, right? Your one-to-many stuff. This is your typical marketing software, right? The MailChimps, the Pardots, the Marketos, the Eloqua, the HubSpot, the stuff that was really, really cool about 5 years ago, right? There's tons of companies that do one-to-one outreach. But if you do this outreach before you actually know what that message is supposed to be, then you're going to end up, saying thumbs down when I say, how's it going so far? You reach out to 50 people and you're not personalizing that message because you don't know what it is they want to buy or why they want to buy it from you, you're going to have a really bad experience with that. So let's look at a couple emails, and I'll give you my take on those emails, what they look like, and whether or not they're successful, okay? All right, so this is a simple, like one-to-many email, company called Visible, really cool company, I've heard of them. Ironically, this sales email goes out. The company that I'm at is already a customer, so I probably shouldn't be on his list, right? And I tell him that personally if I knew him, but I don't, so I feel bad like calling him out to you guys and the 19 media outlets that are covering this event. But it's not really that personalized. They did get my name right, which I'm really excited about. That's hard to do sometimes because my mother named me James, so Jay is on my LinkedIn profile, but all my friends call me Ryan, and then people I worked with at AdRoll call me JR. But you say, hi, Ryan, that's what my mom calls me, so I'm going to answer your email, right? So that's a huge plus. They did that part right. But this looks like every other marketing email that I've ever gotten, right? This looks the same thing as the people from Gap who email me about my jeans, and the same thing as the people that email me about the wine club. So there's not a lot personal there. There's a bunch of links. I could click those links and learn about AdWords, performance, and Salesforce, which sounds cool, but we already have it. So I don't know why I need that. Now we're going to be less nice to these guys. So hopefully we're in the nest and we're all friends and nobody knows this person, right? And you're actually far enough back that you probably can't read this, which is good. So I'll walk you through a couple of things I want to call out. So Kevin works for a company that does sourcing. He says he's not a recruiter. And I only know that because I read this email specifically to share it with you guys, right? Poor guy. But what am I supposed to care about, right? He's sending me something in blue. He's sending me something in bold. He's got something that's highlighted. He says start with a pilot. He says 15-minute discovery. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this. What am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to call Kevin back? Am I supposed to get a discovery from somebody on his team? I don't know necessarily what his role is. Is he an SDR? I know that if it's reached me an error, then I can reply with remove in the subject line. Because I think a lot about sales emails. I know this means that he didn't use something like a Marketo or a Pardot because they make you send an unsubscribe link, right? So he used something else for that. But he's blasting people at such a rate. This is his little footnote that tries to get him in compliance with canned spam because he knows I'm not going to like this email. It's not personal, right? So let's help him out. Let's rewrite it. So here he said, I noticed your position was open. The sales development role has been open. We are an alternate model to sourcing potential candidates for this position. That sounds cool. That sounds like something that honestly I'd be interested in. He knows it's important. He can find me 200 passive candidates and energize the local referral networks, right? These are things that as a hiring manager I might care about. All right, so let's rebuild his email and do something a little more personal, right? I came across your posting for an SDR roles when I was an Angel List last night. I know this is a real person because he's talking about a website that is only really in wide distribution around here, right? So some guy in Dallas who's reading Angel List and learning about Lead Genius, he's actually spending some time to get to know my company, and he's addressing me by my name, so he's winning on both those fronts, right? So that's a good thing. Next piece. He tells me something that makes me understand he knows my challenge, right? He's addressing, he would address the pain point. If he just said, if you're like most of my clients in the Bay Area, this email was sent in October to give you a little more context. If you're like most of my clients in the Bay Area, you've seen the SDR candidate pool dry up. That's exactly the problem with hiring SDRs. They're really available right now through October, and then it's almost like a fine wine. They're gone for like 9 months because either they're traveling in Europe for their gap year and then they come back saying, oh, I'm ready to start working in sales, or it's too late because they came out of school and they got a job right away, right? And some of those folks have do something for 6 months and then they're available again and they start to resurface, but the pool of candidates really does shrink down. So this would be the perfect time for him to tell me he knows that. And I know he knows that because he's in sourcing, right? He must, right? And if he had said, here's a specific way to get, 200 more applicants for this job, that seems like that would be really helpful, right? Now, tell me what you do and why I care and why you're going to solve the problem. At his company, we can get your postings in front of 200 qualified candidates. Don't worry, we're not a recruiting firm, and we don't charge commission. So he handled the objections that all of us are going to have when a recruiter reaches out, right? So clear call to action. I know your pain point. Here's the answer. Do you have 15 minutes when I can call you tomorrow? It's a really easy ask. It's exactly what I want him to talk about. It's very simple and straightforward. And then he may need to send me a few follow-ups to make sure that it's fresh in my email, right? He can even send me really lame follow-ups that say, just want to bounce this to the top of your inbox, right? Which my team is really excited about our current one, which has a basketball GIF in it. Doesn't matter. It's going to keep it fresh and current. It's going to stay up. But if it starts here with a personalized approach with like, here is why you care, we're going to be so much better off than we would be otherwise. Yeah.
He's mentioned the commission, and he's brought payment into it. Are you then thinking, how do you make money because he brought that in?
So I've got a different feeling on this, right? Some people would say like, don't bring up money until the client does, right? And I think that's probably why you asked the question, right? If you know you're in an industry where everybody is worried about how you get paid, right? Recruiters make 15 to 20%, and if you've ever had to use one, it feels a lot like extortion, right? And I hope I don't offend anybody, again, on the media outlets or anywhere, but it feels like extortion unless you've got a really good partnership and they're finding you somebody that you can't find anywhere else. It's really kind of tough to swallow. Like, I just got somebody who's right out of school. The economy right now is paying entry-level salespeople really a lot of money, and now I got to pay somebody 15, 20% of that. It's really tough to do, right? So if he calls out like, hey, we're not a recruiting firm, and we don't take commissions because we know that's what you're worried about. Can I call you tomorrow for 15 minutes, right? So I know that the conversation, I'm probably going to bring it up at that point, but he's ready for it because theoretically, because we wrote his email, but if that was the approach, like I think you'd probably be in a good place because it would be a conversation about like, hey, we're a flat fee software for sourcing candidates. Let's first, remember Mitch saying that there were two things you want to do, right? You want to figure out the products right, and then you want to figure out the commercial terms. If he started with like, hey, let's make sure this product is what you want to talk about. You already spent the time. We got 15 minutes on the phone. Tell me product, yes or no. Okay, we're in the right place. Don't worry, we're a subscription fee. We'll talk about how that's going to fit in your model. Like, I would entertain that as part of discovery. Does that make sense? Any other questions about email outreach before I've got a couple more things and we're going to go to real questions?
One question, I've been trying these outreach for a while.
Yeah.
What has worked for me is not just the outreach, it's outreach and phone calls together, right? And
Yeah.
And I hear there's a combination of you do 3 outreaches in a week and then 2 phone calls or whatever that works best.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you come across any combination that you can tell me.
There's no perfect cadence except for the perfect cadence for your business, right? Like, people can tell you it's got to be 2 phone calls here and 3 phone calls there. If you sell local, right, you're selling into like the same market Yelp does, you're calling every restaurant in town, you should probably do a lot of phone calls rather than emails. Those are hard people to find emails for, and if you find their email, it's really hard to know you're talking to the right person. But the person who answers the phone at 10 o'clock on a restaurant that doesn't open until 5, that person's in charge of something, because that's the only reason they're there, right? Because everybody else is an hourly employee who's going to come in to work their shift starting at 4 o'clock to set the tables, right? So that would be a phone first example, right? If it's about leaving messages for people so they know you're serious, that can be a great indicator that, hey, I'm not just spamming you. I'm not just sending you a million emails. You're important to me, so I'm actually going to call you 2 or 3 times as well. They're not going to call you back. I don't know if you found people. Have you found people calling you back? Yeah. If people are calling you back, it means you're calling a really old, kind of undisrupted industry, right? You're calling directors of AP that have offices in Kansas City, right? That person's probably going to call you back, because what do they do all day? They call people back, because that's their job. Make sure all the accounts are paid, make sure all the accounts are collected. That person is on the phone all day, right? But that's not who most of us are selling into, especially if we're trying to conquer California, like we were just talking about. Okay? Who's familiar with this book, Predictable Revenue? Anyone? If you're going to do sales, you should get familiar with this book, right? And everybody has an opinion of it, but the reason that it's a real gem is because it basically lays out some of the initial things that make outbound sales work. right? One of the gems in this book is essentially a funnel like this one. And we already talked about identifying customers, right? That's part of this being prepared for the call. Whether it's a call or an email, it doesn't matter. You have identified your target customers, you've got your target accounts, and you've found the contact information for those people, right? That's step one. Step two is what you're actually doing. Are you sending emails? Are you making calls? One thing that Aaron Ross talks about in Predictable Revenue is doing something called a mapping call, right? That would be a great thing in your cadence. A mapping call is where you call the front desk and you say, I don't know if I'm reaching out to the right person. Is Gail the one that handles your HR? And if you say it really nice and you end it kind of a little like it's a question, they'll help you out. They just will. People are nice on the phone. They want to be nice. They might hang up on you, but they probably want to be nice most of the time. And you want to map that account to make sure you're talking to the right people, right? And then the other thing I wanted to call out is like even on this basic, simple funnel graph right here, working the responses. And in parentheses it says 9% response rate, right? You want to track your response rate for absolutely everything. That starts right now, right? That starts from I sent 50 emails or I sent 3 emails to friends that I've got to validate something. Figure out what their response is here. Here's a simple table example, right? The number of leads you add to Salesforce, the number of leads that from that list ad, let's say and this is supporting a team, right? If you had 10 people, I'd say this would be a good place to start where everybody's starting with 100 things, right? In your case, you might want to start with 10, right? The numbers here are just kind of a cold example. How many leads are actually getting worked, right, from that list, right? If you bought a conference list, it's okay to start with a list. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying start there and then figure out what those companies or contacts have in common, right? Because that's what you're going to focus on. That's what you're going to dig down into, right? Figure out what leads got claimed. Figure out how many emails you're sending. Here it says manual emails. You guys aren't cool enough to use the outreach yet. Don't do it to yourself. Just send some manual emails. Find some people, send them a personal note and say, hey, this is why I think you'd be interested in learning about this software. Am I right or wrong? Can you give me 15 minutes? Really simple, really straight call to action, right? And then your reply rate, and what a lot of people do, they'll track the reply rate without thinking about what the positive reply rate is. How many of those replies were positive? Not everybody's going to write a total FU email back. That's a special kind of asshole, and you don't have to talk to them. It's a free world. You don't have to call that guy back. You can just let it go, right? That's fine, but you're not going to get a lot of those. And I think that's the one thing that we worry about with like why we don't want to do sales is why would we go after those types of really uncomfortable conversations, okay? Instead, just say, hey, how many people wrote me back? And of that, how many people were actually really positive? Right? There might be a lot of negative. There might be a lot of neutral, or people that says, "Oh, it's okay. I've already got a network of, iPhone battery charging stations." They're never going to say that because they don't, because there's only one way to get those. If you want those, it's in the front row right here. But you're tracking your replies, demos, and your close rate, right? And again, it doesn't actually matter what these numbers are. It just matters that you start tracking them from the very beginning. Okay? So hopefully that does a good job of kind of getting you set up to defend yourself from whatever steamrollers are out there in your businesses. But for me, I found not only like a path to avoid them is doing good prospecting and doing good outreach, but also I discovered a career in sales. So I kind of got lucky both those ways. What questions do you guys have? We've got about 10, 15 minutes for questions, and then we're going to move into the next thing. Yeah.
One-liner you had at the end about setting up 15 minutes to talk to people. Sounds a little presumptuous. I'm just curious if you found, it seems like it worked.
Presumption usually works, right? You're a really clear call to action. If it's that, if that's the best way to interact with somebody is a quick 15-minute call, if you're talking to busy decision makers who want to get to a yes or no, they want to get to yes or no. If it's a fit for them, if they've been thinking about having that solution, they're going to like, okay, great. This is a good time to call me, right? They're not necessarily going to say, this is the time I want to call you, right? Yeah.
People, you like to talk when you're available, if you're not available.
Yeah.
So there's all these elements to it.
Yeah. Suck in the tools. A lot of tools.
I guess my only concern is that people, it feels a little bit more personal to say, here's some time when I'm
Yeah.
available, as opposed to just pick one from this tool.
Yeah. So the question is essentially like, would you use a tool to help someone schedule time with you, right? I kind of have a real strong feeling against using calendar tools. That said, my team loves it. So at work, we use a calendar tool all the time. And it's really efficient to send somebody a time and say, hey, these are the 3 times that work for me. And you click it and you just book right on it. I usually think that's more of like a third email thing to do, right? You've already said you want the meeting, right? You've got the product, yes, you want the meeting. Here's an easy way to get the meeting. Okay, that seems fair that you would send me your calendar. But I was working with somebody on a project last year, and it's somebody who I really respect and I know well and I look up to. I think he's I wouldn't say mentor, but somebody I really like. And out of our first touch of that, to start the conversation, he just sent me a link to his calendar on one of those apps. It's like, there's no way I'm doing that. F you, man. We haven't talked in 6 months. Like, even though I like the guy, like, come on, make an effort. Tell me when you're available. Tell me how much time you have for this conversation, right? And I'm not even selling this guy. He was selling me, and I was going to spend a lot of money on the thing that he does. Don't send me a link. Tell me what works for you. Tell me that you're going to work around my schedule. I don't know. I got strong feelings. But here's the other piece. You want to make really good data-driven decisions. Don't take my word for it that I don't like calendar apps. Like, I may be wrong, but send out enough email that when you add your calendar link, you can do an 80-20 test on that, right? You're great at testing a bunch of other stuff. You've got analytics in your products. Do the same thing in your sales process. Know whether or not that actually has higher conversion. It probably does. Yeah.
So you just said send out enough emails to A/B test, but then in the beginning you said don't send out too many emails.
Uh-huh.
So like, I am like guilty of sending out 200 emails because I can.
Sorry, we have a club. It's okay.
But like, I know they're not personalized, but then I can't A/B test for like 50 emails, right?
You can A/B test anything. You just take 2, right? It only takes 2 emails to know whether or not one was good and one wasn't, right? Is it statistically significant? Probably not. So you got to send out a whole bunch to get there. But if you send out a whole bunch of emails that are already at that standard that you know are personal and going to connect with somebody, then you took away the big question mark, right? And now you've got a control group. When I send an email to a buyer that's a director level or above at a company that's 100 employees to 1,000 employees, that's based in California, that already has a need for this technology because on their website it says they've got an open role for a data engineer. If all those things exist, I get about a 15% response rate, and 90% of those are positive. When I use my calendar app, I'm going to find out if it derails that. When I use mass email after that, after I've mapped that audience, then I know, okay, well, the mass email actually took my response rate down to 10%. Is that worth the risk? It's not worth the risk at your stage right now. It will be worth the risk later, right? As long as you continue to do it personally and not burning up your entire market.
Realistically, though, like A/B testing comes up all the time.
Yeah.
And also, it's hard to get a control experiment together that doesn't sort of make it so that you're effectively using Marquette.
Yeah.
So when you have a rep that's talking about, oh, I want an A/B test, like how do you, I mean, do you ever sort of take, have you in the past taken an insight away from your rep doing a one-person level A/B test and spread it through the organization? It seems to me that it's really just you getting bored a little bit sometimes and trying something
Yeah.
and trying to justify that it was an A/B test.
Well, being in sales is a lot like getting punched in the face every day, like 4 or 5 times, right? So it's like, if you know that you came to work just to hear the word no a lot, right? Now, that rep may not have the same, sense of assurance that you're building a good product because their first job is selling your product and they don't really know how great it is, right? They know that it's interesting, and so they're going to give it a shot, but they don't really know that's amazing, right? And so the best thing they can do when they get those 90% of people that don't write them back, they're going to assume that something's wrong and they want to try something new, right? And so you've got 2 options, right? You can either set up some parental controls and say, this is the only email template you're allowed to send. I need you to customize these 2 lines. If you don't customize those lines, then we're going to have problems, right? Like you've got an agreement with them that good performance is customizing those couple of lines in the email. Then you know there's a fit, and then you can go try other things. So I think it's about how much you're solving for, and if you are really trying to find your first 10 to 20 customers, right? Or you're taking your first 10 customers to get to the next 100, that's still a small enough batch that you should be able to do that without having to send 10,000 emails through Marketo, right? Unless it's a consumer like freemium type product, in which case you should solve this as a marketing challenge, and it doesn't make sense to staff salespeople on it, but that's not what we're talking about. Yeah.
So we talked about the volume of leads that we go after.
Mm-hmm.
What about the volume of emails that we do send? If it's a drip campaign, for example, and you're not getting
Yeah.
responses, you could put someone on a 5-step drip campaign, like you said.
Yeah.
How does the content change from that? Is that really negative or like?
So I agree that you should do follow-up, right? At this stage, doing a big drip campaign, though, you're talking about, okay, I sent those 500 emails, right? Remember that example we had of there's 175,000 people on LinkedIn that like Hadoop, right? All those guys are all about Hadoop. Great. You could email everybody with the 500 email limit that's on Gmail. You got a team of 10. You can work your way through in about 30 days, right? You could just go and crush that entire list, right? Which is great, except for if you're not sending them something personally, you just burned your entire market up, right? If you're sending 3 or 4 steps of follow-up afterwards, which is what you should be doing to make sure that you're staying relevant, because most responses are going to happen on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th touch, right? The more personal that follow-up is, right? When somebody calls you out by name, right? Doctor has a hard name to spell. When I spell it right, he notices an email. I'll bet you do, right? And somebody notices that, oh, it's not a typo. Your name has a K in it. You're going to see that second email and go, okay, this is a real person. This isn't a chat bot trying to track me down, right? And that's where you're going to get most of your responses from, in my eyes. So, yes, you should follow up. You should do a lot of follow-up. Using a tool to get you to a 5 or 6 stage drip campaign, you're not going to need a tool if you're doing low volume outreach. Maybe you're doing it out of a spreadsheet or out of a really basic CRM first. You're not going to need to worry about that. When you get to the point when you've got to hand this off to reps, some of those tools are the best ways to have controls over the templates they use. Does that answer your question? Kinda, at least? Stepping towards it?
I would say that this is something that I would do for the first stage, which is 0 to 10 sales.
Yeah.
Both sides will do that.
Mm-hmm.
But to scale that out from there on forward, we would require some kind of tools.
Yep.
To open up the funnel. Right?
Yep.
That's when I probably what you're saying should be doing the campaign and increasing the sort of volume.
Yeah, when volume goes up, you're going to need some tools to help you get there, right? Because it's going to help you keep things consistent from the different people that touch that process. But if those tools also keep you honest on personalization, then you're going to be psyched to try to keep a close enough response rate to what you had before. Yeah.
Similar to this topic, at scale, it's kind of hard to personalize.
Yeah.
For lead. So how do you make emails that seem personal enough that people don't think it's spam? And in such a case, is it mandatory just to kind of include that link? And if you include that link, people think it is on it.
Yeah.
Less likely to respond.
How many customers do you have so far? Okay. And then your business is built around like how many customers you need to win a month?
You know, as we're kind of a free.
Yeah.
So we have about 300 clients, about 2,000 candidates.
Okay.
We have 5 candidates.
Yeah. So my only reason to ask that is like it gets really tempting to jump over that chasm and say, okay, we're going to just overscale, right? But if you look back at Gabe's slides, he had 3 warnings not to do that, right? So is it possible at scale to personalize? It absolutely is. The best way to do that is to go find a piece of data that most people don't have about that business, right? My day job is Lead Genius. One of the things we do for companies when they're ready for it is we help them find on a mass scale things about that business that are really interesting. Square footage of someone's roof. That's a really interesting data point that's not sitting around in LinkedIn. We can use that to start a conversation. I noticed that it's a challenge to manage a warehouse that's over 100,000 square feet. Here's how our solution might help you with that, right? That's a really personal thing to say to somebody if it's targeted at the director of operations who has that pain point. The example that we gave with the sourcing company is the same thing, right? You could personalize to me without knowing who I was, and all you'd know is like, in California, most of those businesses are tech, so I'm gonna say something that's really tied to like the tech hiring scene, where he doesn't have to send that same template out to Indiana, right? Because they've got different challenges there, right? So that's one of the ways you can personalize at scale, but it has a lot to do with not taking off the shelf data and instead going after a approach that has some really custom and unique points about that, right? And that's what's going to become your unfair advantage. You're going to know that, and it's going to work for you, and it's going to take a while for your competitors to catch up with that. Cool. Any other questions? We got time for maybe just one more, as long as it's an easy one. Okay, cool. Next up, so we've got Errol Toker is going to come join us and talk a little bit about how his company, Truly Wireless, has gone after their first 10 customers, right? Younger business, younger stage business, but yet has already kind of made it out of that, what would you call it, the chrysalis of the incubator-sized company. They've gone and done some really unique stuff around attracting people to their business that I think is really worth talking about. And I wanted you guys have a chance to learn about his business and talk to him and ask him questions about how do those first 10 or 15 customers essentially become partners, because usually your initial beta customers are people that you need a lot of feedback from.